Hi, here we are at the last of our sessions on business studies and law. If you haven't seen the others, do check out the YouTube channel and have a look at those. So today we're going to look at health and safety, and there's quite a lot of legislation around this. If you're doing BTEC, GCSE, or even an A-level, you might not need to know all the intricate details unless you do a project specifically on this area. But there are definitely some parts of this really important for you to know, and indeed when you go into work. As I say many times, the great thing about business studies is that it's a practical life skill as well as being an academic subject. The Health and Safety at Work Act 1974 is the main piece of legislation that covers health and safety. So this is about employers and their responsibility to keep their workers safe at work, and not to do anything in the workplace that would put them in danger or damage their health if that can possibly be avoided. The HSE is the Health and Safety Executive, and they are the agency that enforce health and safety law. It's important to remember that as an employer, you have responsibilities and the employees have responsibilities also. An employee who was to do something to endanger themselves and others in the workplace could actually be personally fined or imprisoned, just as you could as the employer. So the employer's responsibilities include providing training for the staff and making sure that everybody concerned is aware of their responsibilities. They will also carry out risk assessments or appoint somebody to do so. And what that means is that is an official document which pits the likelihood or the risk of a dangerous occurrence happening. So the likelihood, for example, of a window cleaner falling off of his ladder, and that is put against how damaging that could potentially be if it did happen. Okay, and some things will be very likely to happen. For example, a chef might be very likely to cut his fingers at some point, but maybe the damage that occurs on each of those occasions is relatively small, and all of those things are taken into account in the risk assessment. The employer should be informing staff and informing appropriate agencies in the correct way of any events that happen, and they must have a designated person responsible in the company for health and safety. It's important to remember that employees have responsibilities too. They are expected to go to any training that is offered and generally act in a responsible way. They are legally bound to report any health and safety concerns that they have. And it's definitely worth remembering this, because if there is a major problem, it is not just the employer that can be taken to court. Individuals can be fined or even imprisoned for health and safety issues if they've caused damage to other people. All right, so we're going to look at a few specifics about health and safety. First one I want to highlight is computer use. Now, you can read what's there, and this is important. It's something that we use more and more now. In the jobs that you go into, the chances are at least some of your role will involve sitting at a desk, at a computer, and there are regulations around this to protect people from problems with their eyesight through staring at a screen or with their posture through sitting at a desk. So it covers things like having regular breaks, like eye tests, and even down to checking the furniture to make sure that it is as comfortable as possible. For example, if you work in an office, you must have an adjustable office chair. Manual handling, again, is a very common one. If you work in, say, retail, the chances are you'd be carrying boxes of stock at some point. And this training will be given to all staff by a member of management, by somebody experienced enough to do so, and they will teach you the proper way to lift. Just in case you don't know that and you're planning on going home and lifting huge boxes full of books, the main key, keep your back straight and bend from the knees, and it protects the spine. But most importantly, don't lift anything that is too heavy for you, and get help if you need it. PPE. Now again, we might have heard a fair amount about this in the news recently. PPE is personal protective equipment, and it should be provided by the employer to all staff who need it. So it might be to protect hospital workers against infections. It might be to protect builders against falling objects, so things like hard hats. It might be gloves to protect customers from hygiene risks in a restaurant. All of those things are PPE, and there are several more, but they must be provided. So, brief words about equipment. Any equipment that staff are expected to use, they must be trained to use properly. You'd think that was common sense, really, wouldn't you? But that is also protected by law, that if you're expected to use a big heavy machine, you're expected to be trained how to use it before you do so, and also that the employer must make sure that machinery is safe, that it's regularly checked, and that it's appropriate for the job that is being done. So we come now to time and hours of work, and you might wonder what this has to do with health and safety. This is really about mental health and well-being. So there's generally a 48-hour maximum working week in this country. And workers do have the option to opt out of that unless they are under 18. And some do. Some choose to work more hours for a certain amount of time. However, they do still have to be given breaks. They have to be given rest periods in between those shifts, because obviously somebody who is sleep deprived, somebody who has worked an enormous amount of hours, isn't going to be at their best and most productive on the one hand, and on the other hand, they're going to have a pretty atrocious work-life balance, and they may not be taking an awful lot of care of themselves and of the rest of their life. So they have to have those breaks, and also holidays. All workers, all full-time workers, 5.6 weeks paid holiday every year. If you work part-time, it's pro rata. All that means if you get 5.6 weeks of whatever you would normally work. And again, it's important. It is important to have a break. It's very important for people's mental health, for their well-being, that they do have that time off, they have the chance to go away, they have the chance to spend time with their families, and all of those things that matter to us as human beings. So we touched on this briefly. Young workers, there is extra protection for them on working times. Also, there's restrictions around certain types of work that would be seen as beyond the capacity of somebody who was younger. There's a bit of extra protection as well when it comes to things like exposure to harmful chemicals. Fire safety is obviously very important, and you'll know yourselves in school or in college, you have a fire drill, and that's for a reason. It's about health and safety. Just the same in a workplace, the employer has to be responsible for the upkeep of the fire safety equipment. They have to employ fire marshals, they have to do fire drills, and of course the fire exits must be kept clear at all times. COSH is control of substances hazardous to health. This controls things like chemicals, and you might think you're not very likely to use dangerous chemicals in your job, but actually anytime you use a floor cleaner or Tipp-Ex or hairspray, or you clean the window, anything like that It's all harmful chemicals, and most people will be exposed to them at some point along the line. So again, it's a case of the employer being responsible to give you training to use that properly. PPE, and PPE might just mean a pair of rubber gloves, but it must still be provided. The information must be there, and first aid must be available. And what you'll find in workplaces where there are dangerous chemicals is that there will be sheets on the wall which describe in detail what is in each of those products. And that is so if an accident happens and someone has to be rushed to hospital, that sheet goes with them so the medical staff know exactly what they're dealing with. RIDDOR is the Reporting of Injuries, Diseases and Dangerous Occurrences Regulations. And in brief, that means that if an employee is seriously injured, if they die, if they get a very infectious disease, as the employer, you do have certain responsibilities to provide for them in terms of time off on the one hand, but it must also be reported, and that's what this law covers. All right, so we've done it. We've looked at all the business laws that you need to know about. Just briefly, I want to remind you why it is so important. And I think for me, first and foremost, from a moral and ethical viewpoint, we want to treat our employees well. We want to treat other people that we work with well. We want to be doing the right thing. Also, of course, for staff and for customers going into a workplace, they are going to have more confidence by knowing that they are protected by law in certain ways, whether that is their personal health and safety that we've looked at today, or whether it's financial, whether it's equality, any of those other things. Also, of course, as a business owner, if you do break the law, you're likely to start losing customers because they won't like that. But perhaps the most scary thing of all, you could be fined, you could go to prison. And remember as well that you don't have to be the owner of the business in order to be held responsible for some areas that we've looked at. All right, so thank you very much for watching. It's been a pleasure to go through these with you. Do have a look at my YouTube channel or my Facebook page if you feel that will help. And next week, I'll be starting a series on the marketing mix.